Hello, I'm Brian Dott, and I'm excited to talk with you about the chili pepper in China. I'm thankful to be invited by the Charles B. Wang Center at Stony Brook University to give this talk, and I'm hopeful that sometime perhaps next fall or next spring, I'll be able to come in person to Long Island and talk with you all. Spicing it up, how the chili pepper went from obscurity to ubiquity in China. So the overall question that I want to address for this talk is, how did chilies come to be used daily in China? And an important factor for that is that the Chinese recognized and exploited the versatility of the chili pepper. So my overall outline for the talk, I'll give a little background about the chili pepper and its movement around the globe. Then talk about the chili pepper in China specifically as a decorative plant, as a flavoring, as a vegetable, as medicine, its use in imagery, and then wrap things up at the end. So background: the chili pepper is indigenous to the Central America and Northern South America. In this, we can see it here in the circle. And therefore, the chili pepper was only in the Americas prior to Columbus's voyages across the Atlantic. Columbus probably took it back on his second voyage, so the chili pepper probably arrived in Spain in 1494. And then it spread from there to other places around the globe. Important thing to understand for studying the chili pepper is they were not a world trade commodity until the 20th century. And therefore, a lot of the dates for when the chili pepper arrived in a particular place are uncertain. We don't have the records of ship cargoes carrying the chili pepper like we do have for, say, the black pepper coming out of South Asia into Europe or into China. So the records don't allow really precise dating, but we can get some general ideas of when the chili pepper arrived at various places around the globe. So as I said, about 1494 into Spain, about 1530 into India, about 1540 into what is now modern-day Indonesia, and then into China. The earliest record we have is in central coastal area of China, and that record is from 1591. And then we have other entry points up in northern China adjacent to Korea, and then also in Taiwan. And those different entry points are basically supported as different entry points because the initial name in each of those regions is different. And the locals had to come up with a name in Chinese for this new plant and new spice. So in Zhejiang, it's foreign pepper. In Shengjing, it's chin pepper. And in Taiwan, it's foreign ginger. And probably it's arriving in Zhejiang a decade or two before the first written source, so probably in the 1570s. In Taiwan, it's almost certainly introduced there by the Dutch, so during the period they were in Taiwan, so probably the 1640s. And then coming up out of Korea into the Liaodong or Shengjing area of China in the 1650s. Once the plant arrived in China, initial use was probably by elites as a decorative plant. And the Chinese, I think, were really drawn to it because of the bright red pods, Red is a celebratory color for Chinese culture, but it also, the plant tended to have quite a few pods on one plant, which made it attractive. And then particularly the really bright red pods just have a really nice contrast with the dark green leaves. And so they were used as a decorative plant in gardens by the elite initially. The earliest text, as I said, is from 1591. It was written by Gallian, and it's his 8 treatises on nurturing life, a very, very large work that has lots of different sections, and different sections focus on different sorts of things for how one would live one's life. So this is the complete source. This is one of the longer sources from the late Imperial period. So from roughly 1500 to 1900 is what we call the late Imperial period for China. And this is one of the longer sources for the chili pepper. So one of my challenges for this project was trying to get as much out of very short sources as I possibly could. So Gallian wrote, foreign pepper. The plant has dense growth. The flowers are white. The fruits look just like the worn out tip of a writing brush. Their flavor is spicy, la. Their color is red. They are very pleasing to look at. Propagation results from planting the seeds. So that's from 1591. So he does have a reference to them being very spicy, but he also really emphasizes they are very pleasing to look at. And based on where he placed this description within his large work, it's very clear that he is emphasizing them for their aesthetics or their looks. So this description occurs in a section on decorative plants. It does not occur in one of the sections on food, nor in one of the sections on medicine. So clearly he's emphasizing that aesthetic purpose. Subsequent texts also describe its use, and I would argue is becoming popular decoratively beyond just the elite. People plant them in pots as decorations. That's from 1621. From 1867, they are shiny and radiant. Many are raised in pots for decoration. And then in contemporary times, really, I would say starting in the 21st century, strings of artificial chili peppers are strung up on either sides of doorways, in this case at a hotel or inn, but often on entrances to apartments or people's homes. And these strings of peppers are invoking the phrase hong hong huo huo, or red red fire fire, literally, but it's really a prayer or a wish for an exuberant and prosperous life. So as a New Year's decoration, this then is a request that the new year be full of exuberance and prosperous for the people living in that particular place, or the business in this case. So we can see that emphasis on their aesthetic beauty continues all the way up until the present. So chilies as a flavoring is obviously probably the most important influence on Chinese culture for the chili pepper. And initially it was used as a substitute for other flavorings, and particularly for other flavorings that were more expensive. So the naming regimen for chilies in Chinese borrows the character jiao, and this use parallels the English use of pepper. So the earliest use of jiao and what that character originally meant was the Sichuan pepper or flower pepper, which is indigenous to much of East Asia, including China. It's a member of the prickly ash family. It's a perennial small tree, and it's in the Rutaceae family. And the character by itself was this particular plant. Later times, it's often modified, so we got Chuanjiao or Huajiao. So Chuanjiao, that's the Chuan and Sichuan, so it's the Sichuan pepper from Sichuan, and Huajiao is flower pepper, and that's based on the shape of the pod, which I'll show you shortly. Black pepper, of course, is a completely different plant. It is actually a perennial vine as opposed to a small tree, and it requires a tropical climate and is grown in South Asia and then eventually imported into China and given the name Hujiao. So Hu is a very ambiguous term for regions to the west of China, including India, including peoples who live in those places. And then it borrows the term jiao for something that also has a very pungent flavor. And then finally, the chili pepper, initially, so Galian's initial name for it is panjiao. And then over time, we also get the name la jiao, which is the most common name today. So fan means foreign, so foreign pepper. And again, Galian understood that this was a newly introduced plant from overseas, but he also borrowed that character jiao for yet another spicy or pungent flavoring. And then la jiao is spicy pepper, and that becomes the dominant name really starting in the 19th century and takes off in the 20th century. So it is, again, a third completely different plant family, and it is actually an annual short plant. So the economics of flavoring, we have these substitutions and then three main rivals, things that it's substituting for as it arrives in. So Sichuan pepper is indigenous to China, widely available, but generally purchased at a market. Since it's a small tree, most people would not have had space to grow a Sichuan pepper tree in their small vegetable or kitchen gardens. Therefore, they would have had to purchase it. It would not have been very expensive because it is indigenous, but still would have to be purchased. And so fairly early on, in fact, the earliest local history or gazetteer to include the chili pepper talks about it as being substituted for Sichuan pepper. And there we can see this, the seed pods is what's eaten, the pericarp of the seed pod, so the outside of the seed pod. And the Sichuan pepper, as probably many of you know, in addition to having that pungent flavor, also has a numbing quality. So it's the ma and mala dishes like mala tofu or mapo tofu. And when they're open, they look a little bit like a flower, especially when there's a little bit of the stem left on them, and hence one of the other names, the flower pepper. Black pepper, as I said, at the time that chili pepper is arriving in China is imported and therefore expensive. And then we have a fairly early text that says ground very fine. Chili peppers are used in the winter months as a substitute for black pepper. And again, once the seeds are introduced, people can plant them themselves, and they're growing them, and there's no cost for them outside of their labor and the space it's taking up in their garden. But they don't have to trade some other item or use cash to buy the chili pepper. And so it can substitute for some of these other spices where you did have to use usually cash to buy them. The other one is salt. Now in the Chinese flavoring system, salt is a completely separate flavor group from spicy or pungent. So when the chili pepper is used as a substitute for Sichuan pepper or for black pepper, it's substituting for a flavoring that's in the same flavor group. Salt is a very different flavor group, yet because of its expense, at times people are searching for something that could substitute for it. Now it's important to note that salt, both the sodium and the chloride in salt, are important for bodily functions. So they're biologically it is necessary, especially the sodium. And so you can't substitute the chili pepper for that need, for that biological need. But as we all know, we tend to use a lot more salt in our flavoring than we need biologically. So the chili pepper is serving as a substitute for that extra amount of salt. That salt is being used purely for flavoring rather than biological need. And then we can see here this Guizhou gazetteer. So Guizhou is inland and southern China. Local minorities use it as a substitute for salt. And the important thing here for the expense of salt was that it's basically a government monopoly, which artificially raises the price. But then particularly important for the introduction of the chili pepper is in the 1620s, as the chili pepper is becoming wider spread and more popular, there are major disruptions in salt distribution, which lead to fairly dramatic price hikes. And therefore, I believe that those higher prices of salt was a great opportunity for the chili pepper to come in and be used as a substitute, which of course then allows it to gain ground on its own. So in terms of flavoring then, the chili pepper also come into a use on their own. And over time, we get fewer and fewer references for the chili peppers as a substitute. And by the 19th century, almost all of those references are gone, and they're no longer being referred to as substitutes. So chili pepper, here, this is the earliest known medical text, and also the earliest known text that specifically talks about the chili pepper in food. So the ground fruit is put into food. It is extremely pungent and spicy. And then a later local history from Hunan. The pod is sliced and used to flavor food and sauces, vinegar, savory oils, and preserved vegetables. So these are all really key ways of preparing food in Chinese cuisine. And it's important to see the chili pod being integrated into these various things: sauces, vinegars, oils, and preserved vegetables. By the mid-18th century, we can see we're well beyond substitution. So one of them describes the chili pepper as indispensable in daily cuisine as onion and garlic. And then this other one, it is the most important vegetable in the garden. It is used as a daily flavoring, not unlike salt. So we have a comparison here, but not a substitution. So this may seem a little obvious that chilies can also be used as vegetables, but I wanted to use it, emphasize a separate category from the chilies as a use as a flavoring. So One of the more obvious modern ones would be, modern uses would be with the bell pepper or sweet pepper, where you can have a lot of them in a particular dish. But you can also use spicier peppers as a main ingredient, or even eaten raw. So just briefly here, a lot of the texts that I examined for this project, again, from the earliest 1591 with Galien all the way into the early 20th century, a lot of the different texts tend to categorize the things they're talking about. And in many of those different genres, including gazetteers or local histories, botanical texts, medical texts, the chili pepper is quite often put in the category as a vegetable rather than as a flavoring or as a fruit or as a vegetable or as a medical ingredient, things like that. So vegetable is a very common category for it. So here is a couple of references. Wu Qijun's work on plants from 1848 observed that chilies are grown in Jiangxi, Hunan, Guizhou, and Sichuan as a vegetable. And then this is actually a modern poster. It was in the capital of Shanxi, so in Xi'an, and it's talking about the 8 oddities or strange things about Shanxi culture. And this third one is that the chili pepper can make an entire dish. So you can have a complete dish. So the chili pepper as a vegetable. Chilies were also used as medicine, and I think this is a very important way that it was accepted into Chinese culture. Its acknowledgement of how it impacts the body was very important, whether people were using it as a flavoring or as a vegetable or as a medicine. The Chinese traditional medicine, there is not a strict delineation between food and medicine. Everything's going into the body is going to affect the body. And this is a really important concept. And therefore, understanding how the chili impacts the body and health is something that would sometimes be taken into account when cooking for a meal, and not just when preparing something as a medicine. So the 5 phases are a very, very important component, or an important concept for understanding traditional Chinese medicine. The phases are used in lots of other ways as well. So one of the things that we have that get sort of correlated or corresponded with a different phase are the flavors. So for the Chinese, traditionally there are 5 flavors: sour, bitter, sweet, pungent, and salty. And each of those is associated with one of the phases. So wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Chili pepper is associated with the flavor pungent. This can also be considered spicy. And that is associated with the metal phase. But then in terms of medicine, that's seen as pungent items are seen as having a drying ability or characteristic. They're seen as targeting the lungs, the large intestine, the nose, and the skin. And so when we see some of the early descriptions of medical uses of the chili pepper, a lot of them are building on these sorts of correspondences. So this medical text by Wang Fu from 1758, we can see very evident that his understanding of how to use it is coming out of this 5 phases concepts. So the pungent flavor drains off the lungs. So we can see that pungency is there, that drying capability, and the connection or association with the lungs. This is another medical text from 1848. Without variety in the diet, illnesses can occur. Lesser ones can be treated with ginger and cassia cinnamon, which are also both considered to be pungent. More severe illnesses of the spleen or stomach must be treated with something stronger, the foreign pepper. So in this case, they're showing a parallel use between different pungent flavorings, but the more intense spicy flavoring of the chili pepper, the foreign pepper, is reserved for more severe illnesses. So another important system within the traditional Chinese medical practices is the Yin and Yang system. This is often associated with temperature. In its most simple form, there's two categories, and those would be cool and warm. In that categorization, not surprising, the chili pepper is categorized as warm or wen. There's also more complex, more nuanced categorization based on yin and yang. And in this system, there's four categories. So yin yin is cold, yin yang is cool, yang yin is warm, and yang yang is hot or ru. And again, the chili pepper is always going to be on the yang, extreme yang end of this, the extreme heat or warmth end of this. Just very briefly, you can also have 6 categories. There's some medical practitioners and authors who talk about 6 categories. And so at the two ends of the 4 categories, they're adding extremely cold and extremely hot. And again, the chili pepper is always at that far hot end. And this is important for treatment of illnesses. I mean, just to grossly simplify, an illness that's associated with cold, the practitioner might prescribe the person to take medicine or food that has heating characteristics, so it can counter the coolness of the illness. So here's Wang Fu again. The chili pepper has the property of cold expelling heat. It has great pungent and warming properties, and thus can cure those with yang, wind, hemorrhoid sores. It guides fire to move downward. So understanding that ability to fight against heat, against cold, and to provide heat within the body. A little bit later, Wang Fu continues, even though the chili has a hot characteristic, it can expel heat. Wu Zhu Yu, Avodia ruticarpa, has the same effect. So here's a couple things we can see from this, is that ability of sort of fighting fire with fire. And we can see this with the chili pepper inducing sweating, and then sweating, as the sweat evaporates, is cooling. So sweating is our body's mechanism to try and cool down. And so the chili pepper, by triggering that sweating, is actually helping to cool the body. And also here we can see Wang Fu sort of introducing this new plant, or newish plant, the chili pepper, to some of his fellow medical practitioners, and telling them that this is similar to Wu Zhu Yu, which was a very well-known and often used plant medicinally in China. So in addition to those effects that they sort of expect because it's pungent or because it's hot, the Chinese also pretty early on observed the chili pepper having other effects. And these are also very important for the use of the chili pepper medicinally, but then also the way it's integrated into cuisine as well. So two of the ones sort of most important or most emphasized in many, many different sources are that the chili pepper aids digestion and stimulates the appetite. And so this is that, again, this earliest medical text states, principally it aids with nighttime digestion of food. In addition, it stimulates the appetite. And modern biomedical studies have shown that some of the things that happen because of capsaicin, that's the compound in the chili peppers that makes them super spicy. Capsaicin stimulates salivation, and so as you're chewing it, it produces saliva production in the mouth. Chewing and saliva are the first stages of digestion. Once the chilies are in the stomach, that capsaicin can also stimulate the production of gastric juices, which obviously is going to aid in digestion, but also can stimulate the appetite. There's also antiseptic or antimicrobial value to the chilies pepper, and again, it's that capsaicin, that spicy part of the chili that does this. So this is a local history from Trenzhou and coastal Fujian. It can detoxify poison from aquatic animals. People who eat too much fish or crab and get diarrhea or dropsy can boil the fruit to make a dose of medicinal broth. This is also a place where we can see a more regional use of the chili pepper. So a place where they eat a lot of fish and crab, this is a particular benefit that they found from the chili pepper. It's antimicrobial or antiseptic value and ability. Can also serve as an analgesic, so helping to reduce pain. And this is, I don't know that I would suggest anybody try this, but this is an interesting treatment for poisonous snake bites. Chew 11 or 12, an interesting number, raw spicy eggplant fruits to reduce swelling and stop pain. The small blisters at the wound site will expel a yellow liquid and then heal. When eating this, the flavor will be sweet, not spicy. Or masticate and place on the wound to reduce swelling and stop pain. All right, so another area that chilies have influenced, or the way that the Chinese have used the chili pepper influenced their cultural practices, are in terms of imagery and in literature. The earliest literary reference to chilies came quite early, so 1598, that's just 7 years after Gallien's earliest reference in a more botanical approach to the chili pepper. And this is in the very, very famous Tang Shenzhu's opera Peony Pavilion. In this, bridal dew at one point is connected with the chili pepper, and the chilies are connected with female passion. And I argue, bridal dew in this opera is the first example of the female gender trope of spicy girl or la maison. And that becomes associated with the chili pepper. 18th century novel, The Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Xueqin. There's a very strong female character, Wang Shifeng, who's also associated with chilies. Her nickname is Feng Lazi, or Chili Pepper Feng. And she is an important figure in terms of the very large Jia household. She is put in charge by grandmother Jia, in charge of the finances for the entire household. It's a very, very wealthy household. This is the 20th century Chinese artist Ye Qianyu's portrait of Wang Shifeng. And it is Wang Shifeng as a chili pepper. So very much playing on that nickname of hers. And the association is that her feistiness, her ability to have an element of control in the household is directly linked with the chili pepper. In modern times, this is even more prevalent, really starting probably earlier in the 20th century, but we have this amazing song, La Meizi. The music's by Xu Peidong and the lyrics by Shi Zhidi, but it's most famously known through performance by the pop singer Song Zuying. And in this song, we see the spicy girls, so the women who eat lots of peppers, and in this case, they're particularly associated with Song Zuying's home province of Hunan. From youth, they're unafraid of spice. With a handful of chilies, they speak their minds. Passion is spicy. When they speak, it's fiery and spicy. When they do things, it's bold and spicy. When we interact with others, it's hot and spicy. So in this case, we can see that chili pepper has built up a connection with female passion, female spiciness, and particularly connected with women who are perceived to eat lots of chili peppers. So this is a particular female gender trope that's associated with the chili pepper. There's also male gender tropes associated with the chili pepper, and male consumption of the chili pepper is connected with militancy, with revolution, and with Mao. Mao, of course, also from Hunan, very famously a huge fan of the chili pepper, and often mocked people who could not stand eating a lot of chili peppers. At one point, one of his doctors suggested that perhaps he not eat quite so many chili peppers, and Mao quipped back that if I'm afraid of a few chilies in a bowl, how am I going to face my enemies? So a very direct link. And then there's also a phrase associated with him that without the chili pepper, there would not have been a revolution. And just to show you how much he loved chili peppers, he would actually sprinkle chili pepper flakes on his watermelon when he was eating watermelon. So to wrap things up in this very quick tour of the way the Chinese have adapted and adopted the chili pepper, I just want to again emphasize that what was really important is the versatility of the chili pepper was recognized by the Chinese, and it so thoroughly became integrated into Chinese culture because it could fit into so many different aspects of Chinese culture. So clearly, obviously, the most obvious is the cuisine as a flavoring, but also as a vegetable. So we can see it here in this image. It's as a flavoring, it's in a sauce, and then here it's also a vegetable in this particular dish, probably making you all very hungry. And then it also worked its way into medicine. And again, you can't really separate food from medicine within the Chinese cultural system. And so in order to fully integrate it into the culture, it had to be incorporated into the 5 phases structure, the yin and yang structure, and people need to understand the impacts that it had on the body. I'll just point out that in places like Hunan, Sichuan, and Guizhou, even though today most Chinese medical practitioners won't make a formula that includes chili peppers as a prescription, most of the people who live in those very moist, humid climates feel that chili pepper is essential in their daily diet in order to keep them healthy because of its ability to expel excess moisture from the body. And then just to show that further integration of the chili pepper into Chinese culture, we can see it in those cultural imagery and gender tropes for both men and for women.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure talking to you about the chili pepper in China. I'd like to thank the Charles B. Wang Center again for inviting me. And again, I hope perhaps next fall or next spring, I'll be able to come to Long Island in person. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.